It's summertime, as if we could forget that with triple-digit temperatures. And if you're part of a young family, or if you're an educator, you will know that your schedule has changed. Kids are home more, traffic patterns are different, and maybe you've started planning to go home for a vacation, back home. Or you wish you could, and a health situation prevents that. I was thinking about home this morning, and I thought about this song, the Simon and Garfunkel song, Homeward Bound. I wish I was homeward bound. Came to mind. That'll date me, but that doesn't matter. The word home can really be loaded. What does that mean for you? If we were part of a family that made that treacherous trek from Central America up to the U.S. border, just imagine what that word home would mean to you now. What would be going through your mind and heart? What do you expect when you go home? How are you welcomed or shunned when you go home? And how does it feel to encounter those who remember you when? Okay? Oh, he was such a geek in college, I remember that. Or someone who says, you know, we started our professional career together, and now look at her, she's this big hotshot. Or, I remember when he was a very high-powered professional, and now look at him. What happened? Home isn't always clean and pleasant. Often, it's really quite messy. We're not alone in that experience, and that text that was just read shows what Jesus experienced when he went back to his hometown. It was a pretty chilly reception. That text that Bobby read is actually two stories, as you probably figured out. And they've been combined together for us to look at today. In doing some reading, the theologian Walter Brueggemann actually says, do not use these two passages or these two stories together. So against better judgment, I'm still doing it. And I hope that we can draw some connection from them. Now, if you would take the time to thoughtfully read the first 5 chapters of Mark, and I suggest you do that, they're quite fascinating, you'd probably come away feeling almost breathless. Because here we encounter Jesus, and he's on this breakneck pace of an itinerant ministry, in a sense. So he's bringing a message of compassion, healing, and forgiveness to anybody who listens, actually. He garners a substantial following, but with some exception. It seems that the downtrodden, the little people, are enthusiastic. They see Jesus as a hope, and this hope has been squelched during the long-standing Roman iron rule. But wouldn't you know it, there are detractors, and it's the Jewish religious establishment. Those who've made peace with the empire are really not keen on Jesus. And they're not quiet with their criticisms either. In Mark 3, we read about the scribes, who were the legal authorities of that day, how they ridicule Jesus' ministry. They actually say that he's doing what he's doing in the power of the prince of demons. Now, how's that for an insult? Even his family wants to pull him aside, and they talk amongst themselves, and they say, he's actually not well in the head. Okay? So they're saying he's out of his mind. Family at home. But Jesus continues on with dogged determination. His way of doing things becomes more and more evident as the gospel continues. We aren't told what Jesus' motivation was for returning to his hometown of Nazareth. It could be that he was just really tired from this unrelenting pace he'd been keeping. He might have needed time to rest. Or did he miss his kinfolk? We're not told. Now, biblical scholars say that the village of Nazareth at that time was between 500 and 2,000 inhabitants, depending which scholar you read. So everyone knew everyone else. And for anyone who's grown up in a small community, you know what that means. I do. There was no way that anyone could fade into the shadows, and especially not Jesus. In addition, Jesus came with an entourage. He had his disciples with him. Now, if we're accustomed to reading the scriptures, then some of these words just kind of float by us like disciples. But what did that actually mean? It means that Jesus was an entirely different category than everyone else. It meant that he was in the category of a rabbi. Jewish rabbinical leaders actually had disciples, students, or mentees. Now that word is going to get out quickly. Our text indicates that it's really confusing for his home folk. It isn't supposed to be like this. Jesus is one of us. He's not educated, and I don't think he's rabbi material. But he's undaunted. He goes into the synagogue of all places, and he teaches there. How I wish Mark would have filled in the gaps there. What all went down there? Don't you wonder that? Well, I'd invite you to read a parallel passage in Luke, where he describes probably the same situation. It's in Luke 4. So in Luke's account, we're told which prophetic passage Jesus picked. We're told what the application of that was. And I'll just give you a spoiler alert. The townfolk don't come out looking too good in his application. In fact, in not so subtle terms, he refers back to a time when the people of Israel were bypassed and a blessing was given to non-Jewish people. And Jesus applied this to his situation in his day, saying the same kind of thing is going to happen again. Yeah, his hearers, his town people were not amused. And as a matter of fact, they wanted to throw him off the cliff at the end of that. It didn't succeed, but that was their intent. Now that was Luke's account. In Mark's gospel, the townfolk question, where did this man get these things? What's this wisdom that's been given to him? What are these remarkable miracles that he's performing? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son and his brothers and his sisters are right here with us? Okay, that's some honest questions, right? Well, maybe not so much. Let me just give you a couple of clues. Why would you refer to one of the homeboys as this man instead of using his name? It could be that it's a distancing mechanism, or it could be mockery. One of the questions references Jesus' many miracles, but it's interesting that Jesus hadn't performed any miracles that we know of in Nazareth at that point. So they've been listening, and the word's been getting around. There have been miracles in the countryside, and they're wondering about that. But the underlying tone is, what makes you think you're different? Another interesting turn of phrase is, Jesus is referred to as Mary's son. Now, it could be that Joseph had passed a long time ago, and it was simply everyone referred to him that way. But it could also be a comment, a snide comment, about what was that with his birth anyway? Was that legitimate? Who was the father there? We do know it was Mary's son. Have you ever experienced questioning that turned out to be a cover-up for something else? It's quite uncomfortable and humiliating. From our vantage point in history, we can look at that and we can readily see how the people's questioning actually led to their loss. Jesus becomes unwelcome in his hometown. So we bring it a little closer to home. If we can discredit someone with seemingly honest questioning, we're more likely to dismiss their message. Taking it one step further, we can also develop an arbitrary set of standards for who we will listen to. Jesus didn't fit the criteria of the liberator that the Jewish community had woven together from their particular understanding of their prophetic text. And so, Jesus was silenced. We can narrow the field tremendously with the criteria we set up. We miss out when the criteria wins out over the message. In verse 3, after all of the questions, comes a very telling statement. They took offense at him. Now we know what it means to be offended. If we know people who are easily offended, it's difficult to relate to them. If we're people who are often offended, we're unhappy, we're hurt, maybe jealous, maybe critical. Neither side of an offense is pleasant. And taking offense is not neutral. When someone fells a verdict against another person, even if it's never spoken out loud, it has been preceded by a judgment. Where there is judgment, there's offense. Where there's offense, there's closed-mindedness. And when you have closed-mindedness, transformation cannot happen. Jesus doesn't play into the home folks game, not one bit. The text states he's amazed at their lack of faith. And it's then when he makes this now timeless statement. Prophets are not without honor except in their hometown, among their relatives, in their own homes. And he doesn't make this statement to his disciples. He makes this statement to those who are questioning him. Straightforward and honest. And did you notice that he didn't hesitate to refer to himself as prophet? Even though they were questioning him and all this was swirling around, he still says that, matter-of-factly. Whom are we discounting because they were from our hometown? Or they seem ordinary or somehow unqualified? Or are you the one being discounted for one reason or another? I'm reminded of a time when this happened to me. Not in my hometown, but in what I could loosely call my spiritual home at the time. I had submitted an article for publication to the editor of the denominational publication of the church that I was a part of at that time. And if any of you have ever submitted anything for review, you know how much you're sitting on pins and needles waiting for the response, even something little like an article. So the response came, and it was, we can't publish that. It's too shrill. Well, I was dumbfounded. I think the word amazed would be a little bit too kind. Now, granted, it was probably warranted. It really was. But it is unsettling for me to think what kind of an impact that's made on how I've communicated since that time. I can laugh about it now, thankfully. But how do we respond when we offend others, or we're offended by others, or then we're discounted? Oh, we have options. We can condescend. Fine. Well, if that's how you feel, I can throw as much shade as you can. That's how defensiveness and arguments begin. Or we can become self-righteous. I know you. We grew up next to each other, and I remember everything. Or I can withdraw, kind of a self-protection. I am never going to let myself be in that situation again. Never. It's far too humiliating, far too hurtful. Do you want to hear more? We can retaliate, we can become cynical, we can throw a tantrum, we can throw in the towel. Those are all options, because offense has long-lasting effects. Jesus knows he doesn't have time for this. No time for pettiness, no time for sulking. what does he do? He regroups. Okay? He just regroups. He sees the situation for what it was. He knows the questioning and the offense is not about him per se. It's about the human tendency to be skeptical of anyone that's too familiar or close to us. It's also about not wanting to hear a hard-hitting message, and especially not from someone who's close to us and we consider our equal. He knew that. So he doesn't respond with a reciprocal offense, nor does he justify his authority. He could have listed all the places he had visited, all the lives that had been changed. He could have even used his disciples as a kind of a ministry report, but he doesn't. He's amazed at their unbelief, and then he regroups because he knows how serious the situation is and how much there is to do. He saw the bigger picture. He goes back on the road, doing what he does best. There were people out there in the surrounding villages who needed a touch of love, and there were more than enough people who were willing and ready to receive his ministry. As Jesus and his disciples travel, he not only teaches the crowd, but he also conducts his own training institute, a mobile seminary, if you will. All of those who see him in action, where every encounter and where every word, every healing is an opportunity for training. In a sense, that preceding Nazareth experience also became an element of training. What a vivid picture for everyone who puts themselves out there. And another thing about that Nazareth episode, his actions basically say, here's what to do when not everyone fawns over you. That's a critical lesson to learn. And all we have to do is look at the current news cycle, pay attention to that, and observe what happens when that lesson has not been learned. Not everyone is going to want what you have to offer, regardless of how charismatic and engaging you are. It just won't happen. So here's how you handle it according to this passage. Stay focused. Jesus sets up a protocol for his disciples to follow as they go from village to village. Stay if you're welcome. Leave if you're not. Offer what you have to give and be sensitive to the response. If you're not welcomed, move on. Don't push it. Take your cue from how I handled Nazareth, Jesus might have said. The culture of Jesus' time had a specific custom for this. Shake the dust from your feet as a testimony against them. Whew, that can sound harsh, can't it? But what we would maybe call it is a signed statement of refusal. Think about renting a car for a minute. Usually they offer you this additional, usually very high-priced insurance. And they say, you don't want it? Okay, sign here. Sign this waiver. It's been offered, you decline. It's a little bit like that. But there is a significant difference. Declining an invitation to Jesus' message, to participate in this divine dance, to take part in this flow of Christ, has more far-reaching ramification than any insurance policy you will ever encounter. This is an offer much too good to be passed up, much too life-changing to be offended over. So back to the lesson about how to handle rejection. The second thing after staying focused is staying detached. Now, not detached in the sense that their hearts and their souls weren't with the people, but detached in the sense that their ego wasn't wrapped up in it. That's not stated outrightly, but that's implied with how Jesus deals with it. Many doors are open. Don't get bogged down with the ones that close. Be amazed. Absolutely. Draw conclusions? Yes. But guard against becoming emotionally distraught over things that don't happen. This is invaluable advice for anyone dealing with people. And that would basically include us all, right? What I love about some of these gospel accounts is that Jesus is so practical and so timeless. In these two stories, it was, among other things, how can we work through opposition and rejection without getting bent out of shape? And how can this lead to being fruitful? Jesus bravely demonstrated this in his hometown. And home isn't easy. Which home space, whether physical or emotional or relational or spiritual, which home space do you face? If it's a physical place, how will you deal with the challenges there? We can physically leave if it becomes too stifling. Now, having said that, let me quickly add that I know it's not always as easy as it seems. There are many factors involved in leaving, and it will require a lot of support and maybe over a long period of time. Being a progressive, Christ-following church includes being there for those who have left a place, seeking refuge elsewhere. That could mean leaving a country, it could mean leaving a church, it could mean leaving a relationship. We need to be there for people. Maybe it's your inner home place, your emotional or spiritual or mental reality that's challenging. Maybe others have no idea what your inner space is, what you're experiencing personally. Maybe you don't even recognize it yourself. Your heart and your mind churn around where you've been, where you're going, what you thought of yourself, what you think of yourself now, and so on. Maybe you're facing questions as Jesus did. Isn't this the carpenter? Some of our judgments may be some that we receive or some that we give. Isn't this the senior who says little and we assume little is to offer? Isn't this the intellectual who we have categorized as faithless? Isn't this the confident young person who we assume has no spiritual content? Jesus enters into this home space and says, I love you. I accept you. My gospel offers transformation. That doesn't mean who you once were, what you had, what you hoped for, what you represented is lost to you. It never is. Transformation always honors all of who we are and all of what we have become. Jesus pulls everything together into the beautiful children of God we are today. And he says, nothing is wasted, everything belongs. Not only did Jesus give us insight into how to deal with home, he also demonstrated how we deal with the public. The second part of this text could never have happened if Jesus had gotten all wrapped up in ego issues in Nazareth when he was there. He showed his disciples just as much about the dusty places, where he shook the dust off his feet, as about the flourishing places. The frequency with which Jesus encounters opposition seems to far outweigh his rate of success. Whether in the dusty places or the flourishing or fruitful places, Jesus embodies life with people, always giving, always helping, feeding, nourishing, encouraging. If we follow that example, it shouldn't come as any surprise to us if people question our legitimacy, or they may discount us for whatever reason. Jesus did not shrink back. Where is home for you? When the dust settles, who are you? What are the messages that you've heard at home or in the public places that have kept you quiet, that have caused you to second guess yourself? What have your thoughts and opinions been about Jesus? Has he offended you? Did you hope for him to be someone else? Did you expect him to meet you in a way that you haven't experienced? Could you be missing out? Allow me, please, to repeat. Jesus enters this place to say, I love you. I accept you. God invites all of who you are. Nothing is wasted. Everything belongs. Join me in prayer. God, what a picture we have of living boldly and yet unafraid and with grace. I ask that we will not miss out because we're offended by someone else or by you. That we would not miss out if someone has discounted us. Spirit of God, come into our personal place, into our public space, and help us to allow your healing and hope. Amen.